consent application to be heard at a Committee of Adjustment meeting at a later date. The retained lands on the west side of the subject lands are proposed to meet all requirements of the zoning bylaw. In conclusion, planning staff are in support of the request to permit a new developable residential lot with a deficient lot area. The development as proposed is consistent with and conforms to provincial and official plan policies. The development is considered to be compatible with the abutting lots to the east and to the west. It is being recommended that the application be approved. Thank you.
Any questions of our planner at this time? That'll be a bit later in a few minutes. Okay, seeing none. Is the applicant or delegation, if you would come forward, Rob? These will come up at the April 24th meeting. And there's some papers to sign if you want more information on the back table. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Rob Van Porten, J.H. Cahoon Engineering Limited. The planner accurately described the purpose of the application. We have submitted an application for a severance, a concurrent severance. As the planner indicated, the property is designated rural residential, and we're requesting that the properties be rezoned rural residential in accordance with the official plan policies. An environmental impact statement has been submitted covering the north corner of the property, and that environmental impact statement outlined the parameters of the building area upon which we can build. We do know that there will be an archaeological study required in accordance with municipal policy. That will be done. We anticipate that to be a requirement of the severance application. That will be done, obviously, weather permitting. The planner indicated that the application was deferred at the last planning meeting. The purpose of that deferral was to seek clarification from municipal staff that we can continue to use the existing driveway to the existing house, as it is deficient from a sightline standpoint. We've sought that clarification. We received confirmation that we can continue to use it, and you'll find that confirmation in your staff report. Mr. Chair, we are in agreement with the staff report and its recommendation, and we can respond to questions.
Anyone, any questions of the consultant at this time? Okay, seeing none.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll open it up to the public. So is there anybody in the audience who would like to make a statement or comment? If you could come up to the podium, sir, please. If you could give your name and address to the clerk, please. Okay.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Stafford Laurenti. I live at 337 Scenic Drive, and I've come to talk about a few things here. I don't like the way in which some of the things are going through, and we'll talk about it. Okay, the first thing is, when it was first presented, we all talked about the frontage, then that disappeared. Then when I brought up the issue of the number of square meters that was required, they got this magician, pulled out the Easter bunny from the hat and produced some more square meters. Now, it required 375 square meters, which is about half the area of this chamber. And that is a lot of land. Someone could put one house on it. to comply with the bylaw, and I didn't make it. It's been made by all my good representatives, and it was supposed to be 4,000 meters. If they didn't want it 4,000 meters, they should have said, or put it in the bylaw, put a house on any piece of land that you can. Let's become squatters. Get up 4 poles and put some tar paper on, and hey man, we've got a house. But when the figure is there, it is the duty of all the folks out here to abide by it. Yeah, so the other way, I just got a letter in the mail and suddenly the land has increased. I wish I could do that. Shake a stick and the land gets increased. And then I'm wondering, was this all a waste of time? Waste of my tax dollars to kind of prolong all these meetings and carry on and on and on and on. And at the end of the day, guess who's been sold for 30 pieces of silver? Me. Because no point in calling me up here to say something, and everything else has been decided upon, and I don't know where the goodwill has gone. And I'd be really surprised and question the integrity of the committee if they can pass this in all, put a hand on their heart and say, yes, we did the right thing. I didn't buy that house to become a part of a ghetto. No. If it want to be part of a ghetto, I'd go downtown Toronto or some other place where they have 25-foot frontages and 40 feet lengths. This is not what the people who bought houses there want. And I don't think so. That maybe I should have told a few people on the street, hey, this is what we are doing out here. Any of you have got 25 feet of land in the front of your house? Let's go put some shack up there. What should have happened, you should have rejected it right in the first place and said, tear down that old house and put a nice big house there. Yeah, that would be fine. The guys who collect the taxes, they rub their hands and put both their hands forward to collect the taxes. And then, in hindsight, and at the end of the whole thing, what I've got to say is, I'd like to meet one of those magicians. I'd like to meet one of those engineers who can suddenly make my land bigger. If anyone has got those people around, tell them to come and see me. I think that's all I've got to say, and thank you very much. And I don't know what you all are going to do. I was reading a little piece of paper there, and it says to approve it. Again, how can you do it? How can you do it? If I can get an answer to that and say, oh, don't worry, we'll say, just present something and we'll approve it. Thank you. And have a good evening, and I hope I can have some sleep after this. Thank you very much, everyone.
Is there anyone else in the audience has a question or comment at this time? Asking a second time and a third time? Seeing none. Mr. Van Port, do you wish to answer some of the questions the gentleman has raised?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, clearly the land has not increased in size. The lots to be created are in excess of 40, well, one is 41 meters, one is 42 meters. That's 134 and 137 feet, which is consistent with the other lots in the area. True, we have requested a minor exception for one of the lots. We initially made the submission that we would divide the land exactly in half, and it was a suggestion by staff that we in fact make sure that one of the lots, which would retain lot, fully meet the standards of the zoning bylaw, which resulted in a more deficiency, I guess, in the severed lot. However, in saying that, it is not a substantial deficiency and certainly is within the realm of other lots within the area. The house proposed is in the order of 2,000 square feet, and as can be seen on the plan that is before you, it can easily fit on the lot without impacting the neighboring property. As I said, Mr. Chair and members, the variation is certainly within the realm of your ability to approve it, and in my opinion, it is minor in nature.
Okay, thank you. How would staff like to deal with this one? Pardon me? Okay, moved by Councillor Coleman. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Miller. Discussion on this item? Councillor Simons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This pertains to the residents' concern about the square footage. It's 414 square feet in difference between what's allowed in the bylaw and what he has. Are there reasons for that? Except the land is smaller than what it should be. Is this a normal practice to give a severance to a piece of land that's less than what the bylaw requests?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is standard practice. We do have applications in place to allow for variances from the bylaw or site-specific zoning. So in this example, the property on the eastern portion of the subject lands will be receiving a site-specific zoning to allow for a specific area.
Okay.
And in this case, it is deficient under the 4,000.
So it would be a site-specific. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else, any questions? Calling the vote then. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving to number 9, consent items to be approved, A and B. B has the Brent Heritage Committee minutes, and 2 has the Agriculture Advisory Committee meetings. Okay, moved by Councillor Coleman, second by Councillor Simons. Any questions on the second one? Heritage or Agriculture Advisory? Okay, calling the question, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Committee reports, we don't have any. Staff reports, A, Ontario Municipal Board OMB appeals. Brandon, were you going to comment on that one at all, or? Okay. So that one is, Councilor Miller, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask Brandon, as far as these appeals go, are these all related to timelines, not meeting their, the legislative timelines, or?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I believe a majority of them are. I don't know if the map clearly indicates, as attached on page 57, delineates which ones were due to lack of decisions or not. I believe a majority of them were. But I could pull those numbers together to figure out exactly which ones were and which ones were not, but.
If I could just follow up then, so according to your summary conclusions, we have planning has 180 days to get it before us, 6 months. And these guys, they're appealing because we've not dealt with it in 180 days. What reason would be for that? We don't have enough staff, their applications are incomplete, what do you attribute it?
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, it could be attributed to a variety of reasons. Could be that we accepted the applications without having sufficient studies or Class EAs and road improvements done, such as, I guess, the Gulf North would be a good example of that, water allocation, and storm infrastructure, so a lot of different interrelated things. And especially if an application is maybe received ahead of when it should be in terms of timing, that can also factor into it for staff time as well.
Councilor Simons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brandon, I thought a few years ago, when the area studies were coming on the table, that we were not going to accept anything but a complete application. And if that's the case, the application should be complete, that they cannot take us to the OMB because it's not complete. Or
Yeah.
where are we with that?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, once an application is deemed complete by staff and open, that clock sort of starts in terms of the timelines. So that 180 days would apply to all the previous applications that we've opened. Now, under the local planning appeal tribunal, that timeline is increased by 30 days. But again, we haven't received any new applications to date under that regime. So all of these 180-day timelines have definitely surpassed to date, so.
So these are mostly because the lack of information in their application?
Yes, and that we've actually accepted them and opened them.
But why did we accept them if there were lack of information, or didn't we know at the time? Is that
Again-
what you're saying?
No, it could be interrelated things based on other applications that are tied to new proposals and so on, so.
Puts us under the 8 ball, that's all. It really creates a problem for us.
If I may, in some cases, what will happen is that we'll get a complete package for a subdivision, and it may have all the required studies that are there. Through the circulation of those applications, deficiencies or problems can arise. It can be a traffic study or an intersection issue, as we find, or it could be a capacity in somewhere along that line. And if those aren't dealt with, or not dealt with, but if issues are not, solutions to the issues are not identified within that time frame, then we've gone past the time frame. So in some cases, big issues come up and they just can't be dealt with.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions? Mary?
What we're being told is that these appeals are based on the fact that the county didn't respond to completed applications within the time frame specified. But there seems to be confusion regarding the time, whether they're complete applications. Is it a fact that in order for us to deal with the matter within 180 days, that's the figure, it has to be a complete application? I don't understand how that can change within the time frame.
Brandon, can you answer the mayor's question?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, I guess, Mr. Mayor, the question that you're probably asking is that how are we deeming these applications complete if they technically aren't complete, and why are we accepting them? Is that the question?
You mean that the OMB is accepting appeals even though we haven't had a complete application submit it within the time frame required.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, the OMB would be able to, under the Planning Act, make any decision that council could have made if the application actually was decided upon by council. So, to approve or refuse.
New light on all of these hearings that we're attending and sending representation to that we don't need to, is what I've gathered from the information. Hope I'm incorrect, of course, but I thought it was a strict rule about complete applications. And then the 180 days starts. Is that correct or not?
That's correct, yeah. Once an application is deemed complete, the fees are processed, the application is open, circulated, the clock starts at that
But
point.
the applicants are appealing regardless of we've had that time.
Yes, so they would wait the 180 days and then appeal it since there's no decision made.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions, Councillor Miller?
Just to clarify what I asked earlier, so the bulk of the appeals to the OMB are for the time deadlines, correct?
Correct, yep.
Very, very few on here, and I don't know which ones, are because of something that the committee has decided against,
Right.
right? And one that I didn't see that we actually turned down was the gravel pit application on Bishop's Gate. I don't see that on here.
No, yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, these would be mostly related to residential applications. I could have listed those ones as well, but that is one that is noted, so.
Is there, now, I just thought of that one off the top of my head, but is there others like that? Or, I mean, how many did you leave off the list, I guess?
I believe that would be the only other one that actually a decision was made and then it was appealed. Because the other one was related to site plan being the medical cannabis operation, but I'm trying to think, I think that was turned over at council. It was refused at PAC and then approved
Yeah, it
at
was
council.
approved,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
Okay.
there was no actual appeal there.
Okay. I didn't know that the bulk was because of time. Well, I guess I probably should have known, but, okay. Thank you, Brandon. Again.
Councillor Simons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brandon, so are any of these able to be solved before the OMB hearing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe one or two of them are going through the pre-hearing conferences right now. I'm trying to figure out which ones are exactly those ones. But they are going through the issues list and possible mediation, so.
Sorry, Brandon. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can respond to that question. Anytime the county receives an appeal on I'll use a residential plan of subdivision as an example. We always try to resolve the issues and, if possible, come to a settlement on issues, because it's always much cheaper and faster and better for the municipality to enter into a settlement than it is to go through a full hearing. The hearing, for instance, on the Paris Grand subdivision, that's, I believe, it's multiple weeks that are scheduled at the Ontario Municipal Board. 4 weeks, I believe it is, for that hearing. And so obviously, if we can scope those issues down and get it down to 2 or 3 issues, as opposed to 14 pages of issues that I think we brought to this council, then it helps reduce the cost, reduce the time, and hopefully get a project that's good for council. So the answer is yes. We try to scope the issues for every appeal and try to come up with a settlement where we can. There are times when we can't, and we do end up at a hearing and we litigate those issues where we cannot come to agreement on.
So if I may, I've got one more question, Mr. Chair. So if there are situations that have come back through the complete application that have got hiccups in them, okay, and we haven't solved them yet when it comes to OMB, does that register with the OMB as sort of in our favor that we haven't come to any conclusions with that matter yet? Does that ever?
Not really.
No?
The time period is the time period, and once that time period elapses, I mean, it depends on your applicant. If the applicant is reasonable and good to work with, and they're trying to find solutions, they're not likely going to appeal. But there may be circumstances where they will, and if they can't resolve those issues within a certain time frame, they feel, no, I have to appeal, and they will appeal. And then hopefully, they try and resolve them through those settlement discussions like I mentioned earlier.
And then again, they're trying to squeeze them into the OMB because the OMB has finished April 3rd, so.
It's done.
Yeah, it's done, so that's partially why maybe some of these
Yeah.
are.
I actually anticipated a few other appeals coming in before the deadline, but we didn't get them, so that's a
Oh,
good thing.
Good, okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Councillor Wheat?
Some good news, if you look at the ones at the bottom, St. George, the Empire decision, which set aside 2 weeks in April, 8 days or 10 days, it's been reduced to 8 because there's been some consensus on a couple items that have been settled on with Ms. Wilson and Empire. So, yes, some things are resolved, some things, but there's still some issues with Empire that aren't resolved, but some have been resolved.
That's good news.
Anyone else a question? There was actually one in the Hamilton Spectator. Developer wants to put up a 40-story condo building, and it hadn't really been fully discussed at council, but he went ahead and appealed to the OMB. He wants to get ahead of the curve, so to speak. Now, I don't know if he can legally do that, but that made a nice headline in the paper anyway. We've already agreed to, this one's just a matter we need to vote on it. All in favor of? Okay. Okay, we can vote now then. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, and the B part is building better communities, conserving watersheds, et cetera. Okay, moved by Councilor Chambers, seconded by Councilor Wheat. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Down to the C part, Mount Pleasant Interim Water Services. Okay, moved by Councilor Coleman, seconded by Councilor Miller. Okay, put this on the floor. Discussion, questions about this one in Mount Pleasant. Councilor Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I don't know if we have the answer to this, but there's no timeline here. And I understand we can't put a specific date on it, but are we looking at a year? Are we looking at a decade? Is what Brantford's doing will influence the amount of water available in Mount Pleasant? These are just some of the questions I had when I read this.
Any other questions? Brandon, do you have an answer? Councilor Miller?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, it does. It does have to do with what the city is doing with their sort of servicing with the transfer lands and so on, so when they can shut the tap off and we can get some reallocation into Mount Pleasant. The timelines for that, unfortunately, I'm not too sure. I did have a brief discussion with our Director of Water, and he's not too sure either. Even if I were to look into it with city staff, it would depend on how their planning applications would roll out to facilitate the new development that they're expecting. So I'm bringing on those lands through their official plan amendment.
Just to be clear then, Brandon, it sounds like we're looking at years, though.
Yes, it would be, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mary?
Well, I was surprised when I read this, that the water manager has not signed. It has to do with allocation of water. So it would seem logical to me that the water manager should be involved with this, but it's used as a planning issue. Now, is the intention that we would examine the reallocation of water use for Mount Pleasant only and not tie it in with the rest of the county water systems? I think the allocation at the present time, do we have one allocation for water use residentially across all our water systems? And you're going to, and who is going to do that? Will the water manager, has he been involved with this Does he agree, disagree, or want it changed? And what is the response from him?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I can try and tackle those one at a time. Our development engineering division keeps a track of the amount of capacity we have in the system to allocate towards new development. So at this point, based on, I think the most recent application was the 10-lot subdivision on the east side of Mount Pleasant. I believe that was the last approval that took up the rest of the allocation that was available in Mount Pleasant. So until such time as, again, as I answered Councillor Miller's question, that won't free up any more space to create new lots. All of the existing lots of records and all of the historical subdivisions have already had allocation given to them, so those are set aside already. So it'd be any new lot creations that we'd be looking into, we wouldn't be able to provide water to.
Well, you're not answering, I don't think, the question I have. Are you looking at the reallocation of water use in the village of Mount Pleasant, or the Mount Pleasant development area only? As you know, we reconstructed the water system in Mount Pleasant. I would say 2 years ago, it's probably 5 years ago. Time does pass quickly. And earlier this year, or a couple of months ago perhaps, or maybe it's longer, we determined, or I thought we had determined, that we would take the reserve supply, unallocated amount, and I shouldn't use that word because allocation is the amount each residents would use, but we were going to reduce the amount available as the lots were serviced, as lots were approved and serviced, and I think we've been doing that. What is the reserve supply that we have at the present time for the Mount Pleasant water supply system? Based on the present allocation. You're wanting to change the allocation, which would become different than allocations on the rest of the water systems.
Yeah.
And I can't figure out what effect that would have on the other systems,
Yeah.
or how soon we run into the same problem.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, maybe need to be clarified further. I think we're sort of confusing capacity with allocation. But my understanding is that the Director of Water and myself will co-author a report once he's had a chance to input more technical information into this, just so that we can have the planning rationale and the planning policy sort of guide that development shall not take place in Mount Pleasant until we've got more water. Because when you look at it, you could potentially see development within the SR zone category for lots that are 3,000 square meters, so that'd be private septic, private wells, but it wouldn't be an efficient use of land, and according to our official plan, Mount Pleasant is supposed to develop on partial services, so have water connections and have the septic. So that's kind of where this report is coming from. Again, a follow-up report is probably necessary to have input from the Director of Water, but this is just to kind of get in front of all the inquiries we've been currently getting for one-off wells here and there, and that it wouldn't be an efficient use of land at this time.
The concern I have about this policy, if it can be proven that there is reserve supply in the Mount Pleasant system, and yet we refuse to accept allocations, or sorry, applicants' submissions to proceed to approve a severance or rezoning, in spite of that proven, if it can be proven, reserve supply, and I think our figures would prove that if we use the system that we presently got, where would we stand on that issue? And I do want to know where the water manager, the water director stands. He has not signed this.
That's correct. Thank you, Brandon. Through you, Mr. Chairman, a couple of things I can advise the committee of. There are a couple of things we are currently working on. We're currently working on actually reducing the average annual daily consumption rate that people use within dwellings.
To
So,
form the allocation.
Pardon me?
Which would be the basis of an allocation.
yes, that's correct. And so
Thank you.
right now, we're at, I'm just going to pick a number out of the air to make it kind of logical. We're at 100 right now. When we do the analysis, we think it's going to drop down to 80 liters per person per day. So that gives us an extra 20 per day that we can reallocate into the Mount Pleasant area. And with that extra 20 a day, that'll bring on a few more units. But until the big tap that's currently going into Brantford to service Tootla Heights, until that gets turned off, we're only going to have that additional extra capacity that we gain by doing that water consumption review. So that has to happen, and that will be spelled out in Mr. Davidson's report, along with Mr. Hassan, and most likely Don Cunningham will have input into that as well, because that's part of our engineering review people. So those are the three people that will follow up with a more technical report on the water. What we're trying to do with this report is we get people in at our front counter all the time asking about, can I get a severance here? Can I get a severance there? And when people come in to talk about Mount Pleasant, what we need to have is the support from committee and council to say, sorry, at this point in time, we're full in Mount Pleasant, and until we do that water analysis and maybe gain back a bit more capacity, and until the tap gets turned off that's feeding water into the Tootla Heights area, we'll get a lot of capacity back at that point. But until we get there, we have to tell people, sorry folks, the area, as Brandon indicated, is intended to be a partially serviced community, should be on municipal water and septic. So we're limited in terms of the amount of new units that we can bring on that are connected to the system.
Where does the former supply to the prison farm stand?
I don't know the answer to that.
Pardon?
I don't know the answer to that, but Mr. Davidson probably will.
But that is a supply that's no longer used. So is that in abeyance that can be used?
I don't have the answer to that.
But
I'm sure
the water director has the answer to that?
Either that or Mr. Cunningham because he keeps an allocated chart that shows how many units we have available.
I really do think we need these answers, personally. Maybe I'm the only one. Thank you.
Well, I'm supporting this recommendation.
Yes, of course.
And when you read page 65, conclusions and recommendations, paragraph number 2. Until such time as infrastructure improvements have been made to facilitate further development on the Mount Pleasant water system, an interim hold policy should be implemented. And we've put hold policies on lots of plans all kinds of time, and all this is doing is putting it on hold until we've got everything sorted out. We're not stopping it, we're just putting it on hold for the short term. Self-explanatory.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, committee might recall that years ago, we did a similar type of policy in the airport area. And we asked that there were 3 major subdivision developers that are currently on hold until such time as the new elevated tank the contract gets let for that, and then we've committed to those people that will then start working on their subdivisions, because it takes this amount of time to build the tank and this amount of time to process their subdivision, and they come together at the appropriate time. So that's another example of where we've placed a hold in a geographic area because of water infrastructure. That's correct.
We've got a hold in St. George right now too. At the north end of the Spielzak development, there's a portion of that got a hold. It's got an H on it.
But, Mr. Chairman, we're mixing availability with allocation. They're 2 different matters. Availability of water, allocation of the water that's there are 2 separate, in my mind. Thank you.
Councilor Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have we ever done a master servicing for this area? I don't believe we've had.
No, through you, Mr. Chair, I don't believe we have. No, not from Mount Pleasant.
And I'm just, because we're doing another one, is it for Paris, I believe?
Paris.
And, I don't know if that's something, like you talk about the Director of Water doing a subsequent report to this, and have we given thought to master services for this area?
application.
I'm just wondering what, other options there are. That's what I'm getting at, so. Would it be good to bring it in from airport? Would it be good to negotiate with Brantford to bring it? I'm just, you know what I mean, and I'm just wondering if we couldn't find some of that through a master servicing. But, I'll leave that for now.
Councillor Coleman?
I support the recommendation. It's clear, like Councilor Reed says, it's on hold. It's very simple. I'm getting tired of the damn phone call too. There is no water right at this present. Until we do the desktop analysis on this whole thing, then we can come back to with it, with what recommendations. As far as I'm concerned, manager of infrastructure and water is a different situation. The planning applications don't go to him, they come here.
That's right.
This is a very simple matter.
Yep.
All
Any other questions before the vote?
Just a comment. I'd like to see this get, I'm going to vote in favor, but I want to see the existing recommendation if it's turned down. I want to hear what the follow-up recommendation is.
Councillor Simons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brandon, do we have any time element on when we're going to be doing this, checking the allocations?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it'd be similar to the question that Councilor Miller had. I don't know at this time. I'd have to converse further with the Director of Water.
But we're getting on it soon, though. We're working,
Yeah, well,
Soon.
yeah, of course we want to facilitate development, but at this time we can't prematurely be
give a
granting
time frame,
approvals.
but it's
Yeah.
going to be done sooner than later.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Last call, any other questions? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Communications, we don't have any. Other business, none listed. General manager's update.
A few things. We are, as you know, we've been going through a fee review for the Development Services Department on applications. We're having a meeting tomorrow with the consultant to get an update and to look at steps moving forward. Hopefully, we're looking at bringing that forward shortly to either the next PAC meeting or a CDC meeting. That meeting is going to be held here, and we'll come back with a further update. And also, just to let you know, we currently in Development Services have 6 ongoing recruitments for positions. 3 of the positions, I believe, have been, the submission dates for resumes have passed. We're finalizing and scheduling for interviews. And we are about to post for, I believe, for the 2 plans examiners in the building division. So you'll be seeing advertisements coming out fairly shortly. I think they've been finalized. Also, I'm not certain if you've got this yet, but I think I got it in my Friday package. It was on building permit activity. Generally residential, although residential building permit activity appears to be down, we've got 90 building permits sitting on desk waiting to be reviewed and are in the process of being reviewed. And we haven't really got into the big floodgates opening up yet. So you can expect that coming. However, what I can tell you is that the year-to-date, the value of permits has gone up $11 million compared to last year. And so far, we've collected $350,000 in building permit fees to date. And just also, I just wanted to kind of summarize a little bit that we've had a few subdivision agreements that have been registered and approved here. They're Arlington Meadows, which is Phase 2, Brookfield, 1039 Rest Acres Road. We've had the Gurney Outlet, which has been approved, the cost-sharing agreement, and Mile Hill is coming shortly. So a lot of activity there in residential, so that's about it.
Any questions? Councillor Cardy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the presenter. You talked about the Gurney stormwater management. Has the MOECC approved it now? They've signed off on it and all that's done?
Yes.
Perfect.
Anyone else?
That's it.
Marcus, we had maybe other councilors got an email. I've got, I think, a quarter of an acre out by the golf course. I'd like to put 2 chickens on it. I know your bylaw says no. Who is the best person to direct them to handle this hot issue?
I guess it depends on if they're existing or not, because it could be a bylaw enforcement issue if they've gone there without the zoning. If it's a matter of a zoning request, then we'd be putting it through zoning department, zoning division.
I think they said they're in a residential
They're existing?
area. Yeah.
Okay, then it's bylaw enforcement issue.
Okay.
I guess it depends if they're still there or not.
Their argument is more and more cities are allowing this to occur. And I guess the old story of why can't we approach, but anyway.
And I believe that issue came back to Planning Advisory Committee and Council for review a couple of years ago, I think it was. Yeah.
I got the same email when I talked to him, because he's the planner in charge of the situation at the time. He gave me updates on that to send it off to the board. I haven't heard anything back from him, so I guess it's.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I asked, it depends if they're still there or not. If they're consumed, it's not a problem.
Actually, I think Councilor Chambers had a good answer before. Something like the cats and dogs can be in the city, leave the farm animals on the farm. Anything else? We're down to in-camera issue. No, we don't. Okay, we're past that. Next meeting, Tuesday, May the 1st then, 7 o'clock. Okay, so moved. We have to be sure.